Today's meeting covered a wide range of topics, including ongoing discussions on transgender athletes and the continued hate and vitriol directed at players online. There are no immediate eligibility matters affecting the WNBA. Yes, there are. And we strongly denounce the bad faith efforts to use these topics to demean or marginalize others. In other words, we have no idea how to handle this.
Well, they said there's no matters at hand they have to deal with. There are.
Yes, two.
Because with Enes, Kanter, and Royce White declaring their eligibility, right. I looked through the 409-page plea bargain, basically sort of constitution that the WNBA has. And it says that to be eligible, you have...
The WNBA is at war over a player who does not exist. Let that sink in for a moment. The league is currently engulfed in one of the most explosive controversies in its history: protests outside arenas, former NBA players declaring for the draft, coaches wearing political statements on the sideline, fans booing players for speaking their minds, and at the center of it all is a debate about transgender eligibility. But here is the detail that gets buried underneath all the outrage. There is no transgender woman currently playing in the WNBA.
The WNBA, which says, some of their coaches have been saying that men who identify as women should be eligible to play in the league. Okay, now there's a French superstar, 21 points she's averaging, and by she I mean he, 20 rebounds a game. Okay,
I want to tell you what's going to happen when the Democrats get back in office. You know what's going to happen? The transgenders are going to sue. They're going to sue the WNBA for gender-based discrimination under the 1964 Civil Rights Act that our ancestors fought for. Here we go again. Barack Obama appropriating black justice for white gays. Here we go.
There has never been a player who was male at birth competing in the league. The entire firestorm is about a hypothetical, a future that has not happened, rules that have not been written. And yet the league cannot seem to answer the simplest question: where exactly does it draw the line?
Meanwhile, Sophie Cunningham, because of the statements that she made about biological boys playing in women's sports, she is getting booed on and off the court. People are being even more aggressive towards her. Anti-trans and pro-trans protesters are now facing off at games, literally inside the arenas and outside beforehand. Meanwhile, at every single interview, players are getting hounded to give their opinions. And then, of course, you have the coaches. I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but Indiana Fever coach Stephanie White, I believe her name is, she seems completely disconnected from her players, Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham. Sophie Cunningham is going through all these things. Obviously, Caitlin Clark has been attacked and vilified for years now, and Stephanie White has nothing to say.
The collective bargaining agreement says only women are eligible, but it never defines what that means. Two former NBA players saw that ambiguity and walked straight through it. Now the WNBA is facing legal threats, sponsor anxiety, and a fan base demanding clarity. The entire sports world is watching. Analysts are debating. Lawyers are circling. Stay with me, because the full breakdown of how a league with unprecedented momentum walked itself into this trap will show you exactly what is at stake.
Girls were holding signs supporting Sophie Cunningham following her comments about transgender participation in women's sports. And the WNBA ruled that the interaction violated its fan code of conduct, the Storm issuing an apology for the incident afterwards. Sophie, without sort of revisiting the actual issue that brought us to this point, I would just love to get your thoughts on the league's discipline of an owner over a fan interaction.
Yeah, you know, I think I have a very clear and strong perspective on this. With that being said, though, I think I know that people are not always going to align and agree.
The controversy that now dominates every WNBA conversation did not begin with a policy announcement or a league statement. It began with a single player speaking her mind. Sophie Cunningham, the Indiana Fever guard, said in a simple interview answer that she wanted to protect young girls in sports and did not think biological men should compete against women. That was it. A straightforward statement of a position that, according to virtually every public opinion poll, is shared by a significant majority of Americans. Cunningham did not scream it. She did not make it about politics. She framed it as common sense, as protecting children, as the kind of thing that should not even be controversial. And yet, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Players around the league began picking sides. Coaches weighed in publicly. Social media erupted. Within days, Cunningham had become one of the most polarizing figures in the entire sport. She was booed on and off the court. Protests and counter-protests appeared outside arenas. Fans holding signs supporting her comments were confronted by team owners and accused of violating fan codes of conduct.
Are men now threatening to join the WNBA, blatantly proving that women were right to choose the bear? Also, a bunch of Sophie Cunningham. So before anybody gets confused, it's not the setup to a joke about the NBA finally discovering women's basketball. Former NBA players Enes, Kanter, Freedom, and Royce White have recently announced that they intend to declare for the WNBA draft, arguing that if the league is going to allow players to identify as women, then apparently they should be allowed to play too, right? So what it is it sounds like these guys are making a statement on transgender women, but they're not.
The most dramatic example came when a Seattle Storm co-owner approached two teenage girls who were holding signs supporting Sophie Cunningham. The girls were thanking Cunningham for speaking up for girls in sports. The co-owner allegedly berated them, called them names, and falsely claimed that Cunningham had been suspended and fined by the league. The incident sparked immediate outrage, with the Storm later issuing an apology. But the damage had been done. The image of a wealthy team executive confronting teenage fans over a sign supporting a player's right to speak her mind became a symbol of everything wrong with how the league was handling this controversy. Instead of de-escalating, the league seemed to be pouring gasoline on the fire. Every attempt to manage the situation made it worse. Every statement raised more questions than it answered. And through it all, Cunningham remained remarkably composed, refusing to back down from her position, while also refusing to engage with the most toxic elements of the backlash.
NBA facing a culture war sparked by Sophie Cunningham. So the Indiana Fever Guard's mission to, quote, protect young girls in the locker room has become a right-wing flashpoint, so much so that two former NBA players are declaring for the 2027 WNBA draft. Enes Kanter and Royce White both say they suddenly identify as women. Now, White even unveiled a new wig, saying he's in his feminine era. Now, I just want to be clear, no openly trans woman has played in the WNBA. League policy simply states that only women are eligible.
What made Cunningham's situation so significant was not just her comments. It was the context in which she made them. She is a player who has publicly defended Caitlin Clark, who has called out the league's failure to protect its stars, who has positioned herself as someone willing to speak uncomfortable truths. That made her a target. And the fact that she was targeted so quickly, so aggressively, and so publicly told everyone watching exactly what happens when a WNBA player steps out of line. The league that prides itself on inclusion and progressivism suddenly seemed very uncomfortable with a player who held a different view. Cunningham did not ask for this fight, but once it came to her, she refused to run from it. And that refusal transformed her from a role player into a national lightning rod, a symbol of a debate that goes far beyond basketball.
Of having that respect, having that love, and pursuing peace in these conversations, in these debates, because I think that is healthy. Now, with that being said, I just hate how the basketball of it all is just getting overshadowed. I think that you are seeing teams playing at the highest level they've ever played at. You see great basketball, the most elite level basketball this league has ever seen. And it just makes me sad that all this kind of drama and things that truly don't matter are getting overshadowed. The basketball is getting overshadowed. And so my biggest thing is love and respect. I think there's room for absolutely everybody. We don't always have to agree, but that respect and love definitely has to be there.
While the league was still trying to contain the fallout from Cunningham's comments, two former NBA players decided to test the boundaries of the WNBA's stated principles. Enes Kanter Freedom and Royce White both announced that they were declaring themselves eligible for the 2027 WNBA draft. Their reasoning was simple, and it was devastating. They pointed to the league's own language about inclusion and self-identification, and argued that if those principles applied to everyone, then they should be allowed to play too. Kanter Freedom, 6 Kanenstaum, 1050 pounds, posted a video reading a calm, almost legal-sounding statement straight to camera. He said he had reviewed the eligibility requirements, that the current guidelines on self-identification made him fully qualified, and that he was officially declaring himself a prospect. He explicitly stated he was not mocking anyone, not making fun of any community, but simply asking that the current rules be applied equally to everyone. Royce White followed hours later on Fox News, declaring that he identified as a woman for the purposes of professional basketball and would also be entering the draft.
WNBA leadership announces they're having an emergency meeting to discuss what they're going to be doing with the W and WNBA. We have to identify what it is. Literally, they put a task force together to discuss the growing drama around transgender athletes because they got humiliated. They got humiliated by not taking a position. All they have to do is, Vinny, make a position at the top to say where they stand, and it would have been done with. But every single time you're hearing Caitlin Clark in interviews like, can we just talk basketball?
The strategic brilliance of these declarations cannot be overstated. They were not trolls looking for laughs. They were not random internet personalities trying to generate clicks. They were former first-round NBA picks, legitimate professional athletes, using the league's own vague language to expose the emptiness of its position. If self-identification is genuinely the standard, they argued, then the standard applies to everyone who declares it. If the WNBA accepts them, the competitive balance of the league is destroyed overnight.
What about if the WNBA, let's say, for example, they were willing to take it as ridiculously far as you just intimated, and they were declared ineligible for the WNBA draft. From a legal perspective, what's the strongest legal argument Enes Kanter Freedom and Royce White could make?
I mean, they would have to try to play some game, a charade of decrying discrimination on in some way, shape, or form, sex discrimination. I mean, I think
if the WNBA rejects them, it must explain why self-identification has limits, which is exactly the conversation the league has been trying to avoid. Either way, the trap closes. The league cannot have it both ways. It cannot claim to be a bastion of inclusion while also maintaining any meaningful boundaries around competition, and the longer it refuses to define those boundaries, the more people like Kanter and White will line up to force the issue. The reaction from the league was telling. The WNBA released a statement denouncing bad faith efforts to use the topic to demean or marginalize others. The league's anti-hate task force discussed the issue. But nowhere in any of the official communications was there a clear definition of eligibility. Nowhere was there a policy explaining exactly who can and cannot play. The statement essentially said there were no current eligibility issues while refusing to explain what the eligibility standards actually are. That is not a solution. That is a stall tactic. And it confirmed what critics had been saying for months. The league has no idea how to handle this.
We have to protect women's basketball from biological men. The obvious question is, from who? It's actual men, you know? So is anybody playing in the WNBA right now who wasn't assigned female at birth? No, there's nobody. There's not a trans player dominating the league. There's not a trans player taking somebody's roster spot. There's no trans player destroying the competitive balance of the WNBA. The WNBA is discussing transgender eligibility policy because the issue has become politically and publicly controversial.
It wants the moral authority that comes with championing inclusion without accepting the competitive consequences that come with actually defining what inclusion means in a professional sports context. The heart of the entire controversy is a single word in the WNBA's collective bargaining agreement. The document states that only women are eligible to play in the league. That seems simple enough on the surface, but the agreement never defines what woman means. It does not specify whether eligibility is based on biological sex, gender identity, legal documentation, or some combination of factors. It does not explain whether there are medical requirements, hormonal thresholds, or competitive considerations. It simply says women and leaves the interpretation to whoever is reading it. That lack of clarity is what has allowed the argument to explode. Supporters of inclusion see the word as flexible, encompassing anyone who identifies as a woman. Critics see it as obviously referring to biological females, and the league, caught between these two interpretations, has chosen strategic ambiguity over clear policy. The consequences of that ambiguity are now playing out in real time. Kanter and White walked straight through the open door. They pointed at the collective bargaining agreement and said, if this is the standard, we qualify. The league has no coherent response because any response would require defining the term it has spent months avoiding. If the league says biological males cannot play, it alienates the progressive faction that has been its most vocal supporter. If the league says self-identification is sufficient, it destroys the competitive integrity of women's sports. There is no third option that satisfies everyone. And so the league does what institutions often do when faced with impossible choices. It stalls. It issues statements denouncing bad faith actors. It convenes task forces. It promises to have conversations, but it does not make a decision. And every day without a decision is another day the controversy grows. The legal landscape makes this even more complicated. If the WNBA rejects players like Kanter and White, they could potentially claim sex discrimination under the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Legal analysts have pointed out that transgender people are not currently a federally designated protected class, but there are pathways to discrimination claims through arguments about sex stereotyping and gender identity. A legal challenge would force the league to defend its eligibility standards in a courtroom, which would require articulating exactly what those standards are. That is a fight the league does not want. It is a fight the league has spent months avoiding. But by refusing to define its policy clearly, the league has made that fight more likely, not less. The ambiguity that was supposed to protect the league from controversy has become the thing that makes controversy inevitable. What makes this entire situation so frustrating for fans of the actual sport is that the WNBA is experiencing unprecedented growth. Television ratings are breaking records. Arenas are selling out across the country. New fans are discovering women's basketball in numbers that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. The league has genuine momentum, elite athletes, emerging stars, and a growing generation of followers who are invested in the competition itself. And yet, the conversation surrounding the league has become dominated by controversy rather than basketball. One day, it is a hard foul and an ejection. The next day, it is a social media post and a backlash. Then it is a protest outside an arena and a confrontation with a team owner. Then it is two former NBA players declaring for the draft and a legal debate about discrimination. The actual games, the incredible performances, the playoff races, all of it gets buried under the weight of the drama. Caitlin Clark has become the human equivalent of a breaking news notification. Whenever something happens around her, somebody has an opinion, somebody has a camera pointed at it. Somebody is already preparing a social media argument before the final whistle has sounded. She has repeatedly asked in interviews, "Can we just talk basketball?" And the answer, so far, has been no. Sophie Cunningham's career has suddenly intersected with several completely different conversations. Her comments about transgender participation attracted national attention, while her physical style of play and public defense of Clark placed her at the center of another debate. Then came political reactions, protests, arguments on social media, and responses from the WNBA. A professional basketball player who should primarily be discussed in terms of shooting, defense, rebounding, and team performance is now being discussed across political media as if she were a candidate for office. The danger here is not that the WNBA has controversies. Every professional sports league has controversies. The NFL has off-field scandals. The NBA has player feuds and trade demands. College sports has recruiting violations and coaching drama. The real problem begins when the controversy becomes more recognizable than the competition. When fans tune in not to see who wins, but to see what happens next. When the latest social media firestorm generates more engagement than the latest championship run. That is the territory the WNBA is now entering. And it is a dangerous place for a league that is still building its foundation. Controversy can generate clicks. Championships create history. Social media arguments can dominate a weekend. Great basketball creates fans who continue watching for years. The league cannot afford to confuse the two. The WNBA does not need to eliminate controversy. It needs to prevent controversy from becoming the main attraction. And the only way to do that is through clarity. The league has an opportunity right now to settle the transgender eligibility debate before it becomes an even larger problem. It can define exactly what woman means in the context of professional basketball competition. It can explain whether there are medical requirements, hormonal thresholds, or competitive considerations that factor into eligibility. It can establish a clear standard that players, coaches, teams, and fans can understand without having to decode it like the terms and conditions on a phone contract. If the league wants to emphasize inclusion, it needs to explain exactly what that means within a professional women's basketball competition. If it wants to prioritize competitive fairness, it needs to explain how that principle will be applied. The longer eligibility standards remain unclear to the public, the easier it becomes for different groups to fill in the blanks themselves. The alternative is continued chaos. Every day without a clear policy is another day the ambiguity can be exploited. Another former player can declare for the draft. Another legal threat can emerge. Another protest can dominate the news cycle. The league cannot afford to keep playing defense. It needs to go on offense with a clear, defensible position. That position may alienate some people. Any decision on this issue will, but the cost of making a decision is temporary, while the cost of continued ambiguity is permanent. A league that cannot define who is eligible to play in its games is a league that cannot govern itself. And a league that cannot govern itself will eventually lose the trust of its players, its fans, and its sponsors. The WNBA has worked too hard to build its momentum to throw it away by refusing to answer a question that everyone is asking. The WNBA is fighting a war over a player who does not exist. No transgender woman has ever played in the league. No biological male has ever competed on a WNBA roster. The entire controversy is about a hypothetical future, rules that have not been written, and a policy that remains stubbornly undefined. But the absence of clarity has not stopped the fire from spreading. Sophie Cunningham spoke her mind and became a national lightning rod. Enes, Kanter, Freedom, and Royce White walked through the open door and exposed the emptiness of the league's position. Fans are protesting. Sponsors are watching. Lawyers are circling. And through it all, the actual basketball, the record ratings, the sold-out arenas, the historic performances gets pushed further and further into the background. The league has a choice. It can continue to hide behind vague statements about inclusion and respect, hoping the controversy fades on its own. Or it can finally define its eligibility standards clearly and publicly, accepting that some people will be unhappy but securing the credibility that only comes from honest leadership. The question is simple. Where does the WNBA draw the line? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The respectful conversation in this community is what makes it great. If you want more in-depth analysis and the biggest stories in basketball, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We will be here covering every development as the league approaches a decision it can no longer avoid. Click the video on the screen and I will see you in the next one.